I can see him working with an adze even, which is sort of, you know, something you hadn't really see nowadays, and he's doing this really fine work with the adze.
She was just a wooden battleship to me, probably the best boat I've ever worked on.
They're all good times as far as I was concerned, yeah.
It's always good on launching day of a boat that after all the hard work, and there's always a rush in the end to get the boat ready to put in the water, so even a small boat up to a big one.
The Stewart story begins with Ron Stewart establishing a boat building and hire business at Mordialloc in the late 1940s, before re-establishing at Portland in 1951, and then to Port Fairy in 1966. Both Ron and Garry became legends in their own lifetime. I'm in Garry Stewart's boat shed today. The smell of hewn pine and red lead. Old bits of boat everywhere. Beautiful moulds hanging up on the wall. A lot of timber stacked around. A couple of boats under repair here. And think of the wonderful creations built here. The Cuda boats and whale boats, motor sailors, motor boats, bigger fishing boats. Another little dinghy, darling little dinghy there just being finished. Beautiful. Garry Stewart and Tony Kettalars are with us today, and Garry built Jane Kerr for me in this shed in 1981. We're going to have a little chat about past times and the way things were done years ago.
One of the early jobs was a 22-foot workboat for the Portland Harbour Trust, and a couple of the big jobs he built was the 68-foot timber lighters or barges for working in the building of the new port. They were all built out of hardwood. I think it was green when they got it, and then they had to air dry it some. The whole planking on it would have been around about 3 inches thick out of 6x3 timbers, and all bolted with galvanised bolts and dumps, corked up with oakum, particularly from underneath, which would have been very hard work. So he built 2 of those for the Portland Harbour Trust.
So what did he build after that, Garry?
Well, he built numerous smaller boats, you know, clinker dinghies and little fishing boats and whatever. Some of the major boats would have been, one of the early ones would have been the Neptune, the cray boat that went to South Australia, and then he built the Nalene for the Jenningses. It was originally a boat to take passengers and fishing trips on. She was about 36 feet. And then he built quite a few cray shark boats after that. One of them was the Enterprise, around 40 foot, which went to Port Macdonald. And then he built the Rondelee for the Newmans at Port Fairy. She was about 46 feet. And then the Rossandra, 48 footer for Patterson's at Portland. And the last big boat he built at Portland was the Ray McKay for the Kellies. She was around 56 feet.
What timber would he have been using at that stage, Garry?
Most of those bigger ones were some Cowrie, Island Cowrie, and then celery top and hewn pine. I think the Ray McKay was Jarrah underwater and Oregon topsides, and ribs were sometimes local red butt or blue gum from other places, Jarrah keel and stern post and stems.
Were they of his own design? Do you know anything about the designs?
Some of them would have been of his own designs. Some of them say the Rossandra was off a half model made by Bill Patterson. Yes. And I think the Rondelee was a design or a half model that the Newmans had. The other ones, I believe, were to his designs.
And all successful, of course.
Yes, all successful.
So you worked for Ron, Tony. What stage did you come into it?
About 1957, I was building a pleasure boat at home, and I used to get some material off Ron, like screws and nails and whatever, and Ron said, I'll come and have a look. And he come and had a look, and he offered me a job, which I took because the boss that I was working for building houses, he was going to move out of Portland, and I didn't want to go with him, so that's how I come to be with Ron in 57.
Okay.
When he was building the boat for Port Mac.
Mm-hmm. Would that have been the Enterprise?
Yeah.
Or the Neptune?
Yeah, the Enterprise.
And what are your memories of those days? What were you doing?
Building with Ron, ribbing and or doing the frames and making the patterns for the stem and stern posts and all that, and dress timbers. Yeah. And Ron made the patterns for the fittings.
Yes.
That he got casted himself.
Because he was a pattern maker by trade, wasn't he?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
he certainly knew how to make patterns. Yeah, Ron had about 18 or 20 paddle boats, and surf skis. They were pretty heavy, but they were all hired out on the beach. And 4 motorboats that he used to hire out for fishing, and we continued hiring them out, in the summer, and the little fishing boats, little runabouts.
After completing the Remarque in 1963, Ron Stewart sold the business to the von Stanker brothers of Carpenter Rocks in South Australia, who wanted to replace their aging fleet with new boats. Stewart's former employees, Tony Kettalars, stayed on to manage the business and build the boats.
They wanted to replace their old boats with new ones, and over the 7 years that I was there, well, we done 9 of them.
One of those 9 boats was the 48-foot Almira, built in just 6 weeks.
Yeah, we launched the boat that day, and the boss said, if there's enough timber in the yard, can you build another one to be ready by the start of the season, which was in 6 weeks? Yeah, no worries. We've got enough planking, everything. So we got half a dozen fellas together and carted all the big heavy timber in the shed ready, and then started on it virtually the following week. 6 weeks later, she was on her way to Carpenter's Rocks.
The last planked timber boat built in the shed was actually built for me by Tony Kettalars and crew and launched in 1967, and that was the little Linda Kay. Stanky Brothers sold out to Bob Hodgson about 1974 or 75, who went on to build steel boats in the shed. The first steel boat built in the shed was a 50-foot Surprise, which he built for me and launched in 1976. When Ron Stewart sold out to the Stanky Brothers in 1963, he moved the family to Barmera on Lake Bonny in South Australia.
On Lake Bonny, he bought there was a small boat shop on the lake there, and he built a shed beside it, and he took some of his paddle boats. He built paddle boats and skis and that, which he hired out up there, and a couple of little motor launches. And then he built quite a few sort of plywood runabouts and clinker dinghies and all that type of thing, little plywood yachts. And then about 1965 he got an order from Frank Crigliano in Beachport to build a 45-foot cray boat, which was a pretty big boat up that way at the time. So he built this 45-foot cray boat, and they transported it down to Port Adelaide, and then that went to Beachport. And then Frankie's brother, Morris Crigliano, put an order in for another 45-footer for his use, which he built and transported to Adelaide again. That went fishing at Beachport also. So he decided then to go back to the coast. And 1966, about the end of 1966, we came down here to Port Fairy, where he bought the property here and built the boat shed where we are now.
Garry served his 5-year apprenticeship under his father. In that time, vessels built included the Rivoli Queen, Telstar, Viking, Julia Percy, and the Ruby H for Bill Patterson of Portland. Garry Walton owned her later on.
Yeah, I bought the Ruby up from Port Fairy about March 2004, and yeah, she was a bloody good boat. She was just a wooden battleship to me. Probably the best boat I've ever worked on. She just steamed through anything. You never have to take the revs off it. Ran the 8LXB at 1050 revs, and that's where it stayed. She'd just plug her way home through any weather. Never had to worry about a big sea coming and she's going to take the revs off because she's going to pound into it. She just keep going and take them down the deck, take them over the bow, take them down the deck, but you got a pretty good ride out of it. You just never had to worry about her. She's hanging knees all through her. The weld timbers were 10B3 Hewen. She was inch and 5/8 Hewen planking, Hewen deck. She was just a beautiful thing. One time down off the potboil, we'd had a hell of a job getting the gear back on board, full of weed, blowing like hell. It was 19 hours before we got the gear back on the spool properly. And Government Observer with us on that trip, he was helping us out. He was cooking a bit of tucker while we were trying to work the gear. Anyway, the weather was deteriorating. I said, we don't get going now, we're not going to get anywhere, so we just took off for Port Welsh Pool. Just getting past Hogan's, past Deal, past Hogan's, freshening all the time, and half an hour past Hogan's, and away she really come. The worst night I've ever spent on any boat. And the old Ruby, she was good for 7 to 8 knots, easy. At that night, she was still on 1,000 revs, and she was doing 3 to 3.5 knots, and she just never stopped all night. Yeah, you're just totally dependable boat. You never had to worry about her. She was deep. She drew just a touch under 8 feet. I ran her aground a few times, poking around Flynn's Island, where my old boat only drew 4'6", and I tried putting the Ruby in there and run her aground, but no damage done. But full marks to Stewart's. I've never heard a bad word about any boat they've built. I knew the Gay Morale when she sharked out of San Remo. I've seen the Jane Kerr. And there'd be others, but yeah, terrific builders if you ask me.
And then the Gay Morale was the last big boat that he built here.
And you built one for Ron Jennings in that time?
I built that when Dad retired. Built that one 36-footer for Ron Jennings, yeah.
Okay then. So when your dad retired, can you sort of take us on the journey from then on with your...
Okay, yeah, well, had a lot of repair jobs, etc. Probably the first big job I had was the repairing the Kathleen, which got burnt at Port Macdonald. And we brought that into the shed here and rebuilt that. And then the first new boat was the what's called originally called the Carol Land, which was Jennings' daughter, now called Mary S. And then I built a 46-footer of the Friendship, a charter boat, and then the Rossandra Allen 49-foot crave boat for Bill Patterson.
I think that's now called the Blue Moon, is it?
Yeah, it's called the Blue Moon now, yep. And then built a boat for Gary Kerr, the Jane Kerr, which I'll get to know it a lot more now on a few trips we've been on it. Yeah, and then the Joanna Cherie, another 48-footer, and the Ultimate Ambition was the last crave boat we built in here. She was a 48-footer also. And since then, yeah, 40-foot motor sailor, and since then made a lot of smaller carvel plank boats.
Yeah.
But getting back to some of the boats Dad built here, before fiberglass sort of took over, You know, he built a lot of small plywood dinghies and like little racing yachts like herons and fireballs and moths and things like that. But then fiberglass took over all that sort of boat building for what he was doing anyway.
Yeah, a lot of repair work. What was most of your repair work, Garry?
In Port Fairy here,
Yeah.
well, he did a lot of fishing boat work here, like quite a few South Australian fishermen from Robe and Beachport, Port Macdonald would come around in the winter time for work here on the timber boats. And then there was other general repairs on boats from Port Fairy and surrounding. Yeah.
One of the replicas that Garry has built is a 26-foot yawl, a type that was used as a tender for the famous warship Victory.
I described the boat as an old man's folly, and I had this idea of building a boat and or having a boat built. So the boat is described as a yawl. The plans were 26 feet yawl, and so the Royal Navy had one of those built. Sterling from Devon, his famous boat builder, he built it, and so there's one of these boats more or less identical to mine sitting alongside the Victory. Anyway, we sent away for the plans, we got the plans, and went down to Garry Stewart. So I've had a lot to do with Garry over the years and admired his work, and so we decided we'd build this boat. Pleasure to watch him work, really. He's had a lot of experience over the years, but he's an absolute perfectionist. To set the thing up, you know, from the plans, all the moulds and bending the timbers, the ribs in the boat there, yew and pine, and there's some quite tight bends in the hull, so some of them were steamed. And same with the planks, a few tight parts there where they had to steam the timbers. You can see him working with an adze even, which is sort of, you know, something you rarely see nowadays. And he's doing this really fine work with the adze. So I think Garry really enjoyed building it. It was an unusual boat to build, really. He starts early and he works right through the day, and so. I almost spent a solid 12 months building this boat, and I can't sort of look back and say, well, he was slouching, and he put his heart and soul into it, and so it, a lot of work in a boat this size and of this quality. I was working along with Garry, but not to any great extent. I don't think he wanted anyone else to do too much to the boat. I helped him when we were riveting. I was dolling on the outside of the boat, and anyway, so this little seal on the sailing tiller, that was the only little bit he would let me make. So that's my little contribution here. Yeah, so I think he's asleep. I look on it as like the Queen with her boats that she's got stored. She takes them out on special occasions, and that's why I see this boat.
Garry mentioned Jane Kerr a few minutes ago. I had it designed by Ken Lako. I asked him to draw up a combined cruising fishing boat. So she's quite a bit finer underwater than your average fishing boat. I fished and cruised in her as intended. When we built the Jane Kerr, I could have been one of Garry's more difficult clients. The scantlings on Jane Kerr were probably heavier than what you normally do.
Yes. Yeah.
And probably it didn't need to be.
Possibly, yeah. Say Jane Kerr, she's got 3 laminations of X3x1. 2 laminations would have been enough to require for the marine board. So.
Yeah.
Same with the stringer sizes.
And stringer sizes, were they?
Yeah, well, they were 2 laminations of 6x2 inch, possibly 2 6x1.5s would have been enough. And the planking, which the owner specified was 2 inch, which is very, very strong. So she's a very strong boat.
I've got photos of you caulking the Jane. That must have been hard work, working up under the hull all the time. And I've got another photo of you planing off of a little hollow plane, a little curved plane in the hollow sections of the vessel. And I know I wanted it roved instead of clenched.
Yep.
I got that idea off Ted Searles in Adelaide.
Yeah.
And it wasn't particularly needed. It wasn't necessary, was it?
Not really, but roving is possibly a little bit better in the sense of sometimes clenching, particularly with a large gauge nail, can split the timber, clenching them in down just off the grain a little bit. But so one's better than the other in some ways, and vice versa. Clenching is a lot quicker.
Yes. And I remember you had to pack the rib out a little bit with a little bit of timber for the lining.
Yes, yeah, just so they don't sit on the rove. That's a little bit more work there. That's a bit. But the sort of when you're ribbing a boat up, it's normally, you know, like green timber, and the timber shrinks a little bit as it all dries, and the steaming sort of seasons it a bit. So the roves tend to pull everything together better when you're riveting up than the clenched nail would.
Right. And every time I sleep aboard the Jane, I look at those deck beams and I think how beautiful they are.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, they were all celery top, X 10 inch by 3 inch, with a 3 inch camber in it, so they end up around about 6 inch wide, full camber, 3 inch, X 3 inch thick.
We talked about the ribbing, 3 laminations.
Yes.
Must have been a lot of work in checking all those ribs into the keel. They're all very neatly done. That must have taken you days, did it?
Yeah, well, it's all done on the backbone when you're doing that, when the keel's laying over on its side. So on those boats, the rib checkouts are all about 8 inch centres along the keel. So once you've got all the rabbit line checked in, gives you angle as it goes around, well then you cut those checkouts. So it's not too bad, it goes all right.
I got that the transom continues right up into the bulwarks on that angle because I wanted to put dinghy davits on it.
Yes.
And the davits would sort of follow the angle of the transom. That was the reason for that.
Yep.
But she's much admired, I think, because of that varnish yew and pine.
Yeah, it does look nice, and she's got that little bit of a tumble home in the top parts near where the bulwarks are. So, yeah.
She seems to take the eye, but so does the Ultimate Ambition and all the others.
Yeah, she's a little bit more modern looking in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful boats.
Yeah.
You're famous Australia-wide, Garry Stewart.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Yes.
How long would it take you? How many hours would there be in building a boat like the Ultimate Ambition?
Approximately, not counting subcontractors like electricians, etc., around about 6,000 hours.
Now, was there a stage when your father's designs went to beamier boats with wider transom? Was a Gay Morel probably the first one of those?
Yeah, I would say that the boats became a little bit beamier, a bit wider in the stern, a little bit, some of them a little bit deeper in the, bit more in the bilge area to allow for the cray well and carrying extra, if they were shark fishing or whatever, to give a bit more volume there.
Yes.
And a bit more deck space at the same time.
Yes. No, they're good looking boats and good practical boats.
Yes.
When you built the Jane Kerr for me, I asked you, I reckon, what was the difference in price between planking it with celery top and planking it with yew and pine? And I seem to remember the difference was $2,000.
Yeah.
Which seems laughable by today's standards.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think twice about it, but at the time. But of course, yew and pine was only $1.50 a foot at that stage, I think, in 1981. And there's a lot said about the yew and pine.
I guess it's easier to work with than some other timbers.
Yeah, it's beautiful to work with. It's got that natural oil in it, so your tools slide nicely over it, and it steam bends well. The natural oil in it softens it up and steam bends very well, and celery top does also steam very well.
So what do you think of it all looking back, Tony? I'll just put the camera on you. Speak up a little bit. Would you do it all again?
Yes, the older you get, the more you learn, and you come up with good ideas. Yeah. Ron was a terrific bloke. He worked for. He helped me out.
Plenty of patience.
Yeah.
What were the best times? What do you remember looking back and think, gee, that was really good?
Oh, I don't regret anything. They're all good times as far as I was concerned. Yeah.
What have been the good times, Gary? What really stands out?
Oh, nothing in particular really, but it's always good on launching day of a boat that after all the hard work, and there's always a rush in the end to get the boat ready to put in the water, so even a small boat up to a big one, it's always a good day.
Nowadays, Jane Kerr is owned by Tim and Sally Phillips of the Wooden Boat Shop at Soretto, and we cruise down to Hobart every 2 years in company with them in the Storm Bay, a classic 1925 fishing boat built in Hobart. Gary and I, with a couple of other friends, have a pretty good time. We are very fortunate.
Yeah, enjoy going to the Australian Wooden Boat Festival, particularly going down on the Jane Kerr. It's a cruise fishing trip to get down there, and we always have a good time down there. Catch up with old friends that you don't see every now and again. Yeah, we have a good skipper to take us down, being Garry Kerr.
And someone else keeps us in praise and shark.
Yeah.
Praise and gummy.
We all like our fishing. So it's good to be able to do a trip on a boat that you've been involved in constructing, and you know that it's all safe, you've got no problems about the boat.
Yes, the old boat gets there with the owner and the builder after 44 years.
Yeah.
We're still going. Touch wood.
It's pretty good.